My name is Father Michael O'Connor, and I've been a Catholic priest for 40 years. I'm 65 years old, assigned to St. Augustine's Church in rural Ireland, a small stone building that stood for 300 years, serving a congregation poem that's been shrinking for 3 decades. It was a Thursday evening in late September when my life changed forever. I was sitting in the confessional booth, as I do every Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m., waiting for parishioners who rarely come anymore. In 40 years, I've heard thousands of confessions. Adultery, theft, lies, the usual catalog of human weakness. Nothing surprises me anymore. Or so I thought. At 7:30 p.m., I heard the door to the other side of the confessional open and close. Someone knelt on the other side of the wooden screen that separates confessor from penitent. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," came a voice. Male, but strange. The accent was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Not Irish, not British, not American. Something else entirely. Each word was pronounced perfectly, but the rhythm was wrong, like someone who'd learned English from a textbook but never heard it spoken. "How long has it been since your last confession?" I asked, following the ritual I'd performed thousands of times. 2,024 years, he said. I almost laughed. Someone's idea of a joke. "My son, confession is a sacred sacrament. If you've come to mock, I am not mocking, Father Michael O'Connor. I am here because I need to confess something that has burdened my soul for 2 millennia, and because you, specifically, need to hear it." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. How did he know my name? I'd said nothing to identify myself. "I'm listening," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I was there when Jesus Christ walked the earth. I watched him teach. I watched him perform miracles. I watched him die on the cross. And I know why he came. The real reason. Not the one your church teaches. My hands clenched. The church teaches that Christ came to redeem humanity from sin, to offer salvation through his sacrifice on— "That is what you were told to teach," he interrupted gently. "But it is not the truth. Or rather, it is not the whole truth. It is a simplified version given to a species that was not ready to understand the real reason." "And you know the real reason?" "Yes, because I was part of the mission. I am not human, Father O'Connor. I am what your limited language would call an alien, a being from another world. And Jesus Christ was sent to earth not to save you from sin, but to save you from something far worse, something that is coming, something that will arrive in your lifetime." My heart was pounding now. This was insane, a prank, a mentally ill person. But something in his voice, the absolute certainty, the weight of ancient sorrow, made me hesitate. "Show yourself," I said. "Step out where I can see you. Are you certain? What you see will change everything you believe. I'm a priest. I've dedicated my life to truth. Show me." There was a long pause. Then I heard him stand. The door to his side of the confessional opened, and when he stepped into the light of the church, into my view, I understood why he'd warned me. He was tall, perhaps 7 feet. His skin was pale, almost translucent, with a faint blue undertone. His eyes were large, almond-shaped, a deep violet color that seemed to hold galaxies. He wore simple robes, gray and flowing, that moved as if alive. But it was his face that stopped my breath. Because despite the alien features, despite everything wrong about his appearance, There was something achingly familiar about his expression. Compassion. Ancient, infinite compassion. Like the face of Christ in the icons I'd prayed before for 40 years. "My name is Ariel," he said, "and I need to tell you why Jesus really came to earth. Before it's too late." I stumbled out of the confessional, my legs barely supporting me. The church was empty. It was past 8 p.m. now, and the few parishioners who attended evening mass had long since gone home. Ariel stood in the center aisle, his tall form casting long shadows in the candlelight. He looked around at the stone walls, the stained glass windows, the crucifix above the altar. "I have not been inside one of your churches in many centuries," he said softly. "They have grown more elaborate, more beautiful, but also more distant from what he taught." "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse. "I am a guardian. My people have watched over Earth since before your species learned to speak. We observe. We protect. We guide when permitted. And 2,000 years ago we were given a mission unlike any we had undertaken before." He moved toward the altar, and I followed, drawn by something I couldn't name. Fear? Curiosity? The same pull I'd felt the first time I'd sensed God's presence as a young seminarian? "Your Bible says that God sent His only Son to die for humanity's sins," Ariel continued. "This is true in a way. But it is a metaphor, a simplification. The reality is both stranger and more urgent." "Then tell me the reality," I said, my priest's training overriding my shock. "If you came all this way, if you've waited 2,000 years, tell me the truth." Ariel turned to face me, those violet eyes locking onto mine. "Jesus Christ was not sent to die for your sins. He was sent to prepare humanity for what is coming. For the harvest." "The harvest? What are you talking about?" "Your planet, Father O'Connor, is one of millions of worlds seeded with conscious life. And conscious life, when it reaches a certain level of development, becomes valuable. Not for slavery, not for resources, but for something you have no words to describe. The energy of consciousness itself, the spark of awareness. It can be harvested, consumed, used to power technologies and beings that exist on levels your physics cannot yet measure." I felt sick. "You're saying there are beings that eat consciousness? That feed on souls?" "Yes. They are called the Reapers, and they visit developing worlds every few thousand years to harvest whatever conscious beings have evolved. They came to Earth 3,000 years ago. They found humanity primitive, barely self-aware, not worth harvesting yet. But they would return, in another 1,000 years, they said, to see if you had ripened. And Jesus? Was sent as an inoculation, as a vaccine, to give humanity a chance to survive the harvest." I leaned against the pew, my head spinning. How? How would Jesus save us from beings that harvest consciousness? By teaching you to elevate your consciousness beyond what the reapers can touch. By showing you that love, forgiveness, compassion, sacrifice, these things transform consciousness into something the reapers cannot consume, something that transcends the physical plane they operate on. You're saying Jesus came to make us inedible? In crude terms, yes, but more accurately, He came to help you evolve, to show you the path to a form of consciousness that the reapers cannot harvest, a consciousness that exists partially outside of physical reality. That is what your religions call the soul, the eternal part, the part that survives death because it has transcended the material realm the reapers feed upon. I thought about the teachings of Christ. Love your enemies. Turn the other cheek. Forgive 70 times 7. Die to self. Be born again. He was teaching us to transcend, I whispered. Yes, and those who truly follow his teachings, who truly transform their consciousness through love and sacrifice, become unreachable by the reapers. They evolve beyond the harvest. They become, in your terms, saved. And those who don't? Ariel's expression grew infinitely sad. They will be harvested when the reapers return. Their consciousness consumed, their souls extinguished, not as punishment, but as simple predation. The way you harvest wheat. When? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. When do the reapers return? Soon, Father O'Connor. Very soon. Within the next 20 years. That is why I have come, to warn you, to remind you of the real mission. Because your church, in its focus on sin and salvation and rules, has forgotten what Jesus actually came to teach. I'm a priest. I've dedicated 40 years of my life to the Catholic Church, preaching the gospel, administering sacraments, teaching that Jesus came to die for our sins. But last month, something happened that shattered everything I thought I knew. An alien appeared in my confessional booth and told me the real reason Jesus came to earth. And it wasn't to save us from sin. It was something far more urgent, far more terrifying, and far more beautiful than anything the church has ever taught. Before I tell you what he revealed, hit that subscribe button. Because once you hear the true purpose of Christ's mission, you'll never read the Bible the same way again. I should have thrown him out. Called the police. Assumed this was some elaborate hoax or the ravings of a madman in an elaborate costume. But I didn't. Because 40 years as a priest had taught me to recognize truth when I heard it, even when it came from impossible sources. If what you're saying is true, I said slowly, then you have proof. Evidence. Something more than just your word. Ariel reached into his robes and pulled out a small object. It looked like a crystal, roughly the size of a walnut, that pulsed with internal light. This is a recording device, Betiung, he said. It contains visual and auditory data from 2,000 years ago. From the time when my people worked directly with Jesus to prepare humanity for the harvest. He placed it in my hand. The crystal was warm, almost alive, vibrating gently against my palm. How do I? Before I could finish the question, the crystal activated. Suddenly I wasn't in my church anymore. I was standing on a hillside in ancient Judea. I could feel the sun on my face, smell the dust and olive trees, hear the murmur of crowds gathering. And there, standing on a rock outcropping, teaching a group of perhaps 200 people, was Jesus Christ. He looked nothing like the Renaissance paintings. He was shorter than I'd imagined, his skin darker, weathered by sun and work. His hands bore the calluses of a carpenter. But his eyes, those eyes held depths that made my soul ache. Blessed are the pure in heart, he was saying, for they shall see God. But what shocked me was what I saw next. Standing beside Jesus, invisible to the crowd, but clearly visible to me in this recording, were 3 figures. Tall, translucent, beings like Ariel, guardians. Jesus could see them. He would occasionally glance at them, as if for confirmation or guidance, and they would nod or gesture, or sometimes lean close and whisper something only he could hear. The scene shifted. Now I was in a garden at night. Gethsemane. Jesus was alone, praying in agony, sweat like drops of blood falling from his face. "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." And then Ariel appeared beside him. Not invisible this time, fully manifested. Jesus could see him clearly. "Ariel," Jesus said, his voice breaking. "I am afraid. I know what tomorrow brings. I know I must go through with it. But I am afraid." "I know," Ariel said gently. "Fear is part of being human. It does not diminish your divinity. It confirms it." "Will it be enough?" Jesus asked. "Will my teaching, my example, my sacrifice, will it be enough to save them from the harvest?" "It will be enough for those who truly listen, for those who truly follow, but many will not. Many will transform your message into something else, into rules and power and judgment, and those people will not be saved, no matter how loudly they claim your name." Jesus nodded slowly. "Then I can only do what I was sent to do. Plant the seed. Show the way. Hope that enough of them follow it to preserve the species." "That is all any teacher can do," Ariel said. The vision faded. I was back in my church, the crystal still warm in my hand, tears streaming down my face. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew about the harvest. About the reapers. About all of it." "Yes," Ariel confirmed. "His mission was never about appeasing an angry God. It was about showing humanity how to evolve beyond what the reapers could touch, how to become beings of pure love and consciousness that exist partially outside the physical realm." And the resurrection was proof that he had succeeded, that his consciousness had transcended death, that he had become unreachable by the reapers. He was showing you the destination, the goal, what you could all become if you followed his path. I looked up at the crucifix above the altar. For 40 years, I had seen it as a symbol of sacrifice for sin. Now I saw it as something else, a manual for transcendence, instructions for survival. "What do I do with this knowledge?" I asked. "What you have always done, Father O'Connor. Tell the truth. Preach the gospel. But this time understand what you're really preaching. Not salvation from sin, but salvation from consumption. Not eternal life as a reward, but eternal life as an evolutionary necessity. The church will never accept this. Some will, some won't. But that is not your concern. Your concern is simple. Teach people to truly love, truly forgive, truly transcend their egos and fears and hatreds, because those who do will survive, and those who don't." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Ariel stayed with me through the night. We sat in the pews of my empty church, and he told me things that shook the foundations of everything I'd believed. "The Vatican knows," he said at one point. I stared at him. "What?" "The Vatican. The highest levels. They have known about the reapers for centuries. They have archives that document encounters with my people, records that confirm everything I've told you." "That's impossible. I've been a priest for 40 years. I've studied in Rome. I've never seen or heard." "You are a parish priest, Father O'Connor. Faithful, devoted, but not part of the inner circle. The knowledge is restricted to the highest levels. cardinals in specific offices, the prefect of the secret archives, a select few in the congregation for the doctrine of the faith. Why would they hide it? Because they decided centuries ago that the masses were not ready, that revealing the truth about the reapers would cause panic, chaos, the collapse of social order. So they kept the truth, and they fed the people a simplified version. Salvation through faith, heaven and hell, rules and sacraments, all true in a way, but not the whole truth. And you let them? I felt anger rising. You let them lie to billions of people for centuries. We do not interfere with human free will, Father. Even when you make choices we disagree with. The Vatican's decision to simplify the truth was their choice to make. We merely watch, guide when asked, but we do not control. People need to know. I stood, pacing in front of the altar. If the reapers are coming in 20 years, people need time to prepare, to truly change, to learn what Jesus actually taught. I agree. That is why I am here, why I chose you. Why me? I'm nobody, an old country priest in a dying parish. Why not appear to the Pope, to bishops, to people with actual authority? Ariel smiled, and it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. Because those with authority are invested in maintaining authority. Because those with power are afraid to lose power. Because the Vatican, for all its good works and faithful servants, has become as much about institution as about truth. You, Father Michael O'Connor, have nothing to lose. Your parish is dying. Your congregation barely exists. You have no ambition for higher office. You have only love for truth and love for your flock. That makes you perfect. Perfect for what? For being the voice crying in the wilderness. For telling people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. For preparing them for the harvest. I thought about my small congregation. Mrs. Murphy, who came to daily mass even though she was 90 and could barely walk. Young Tommy Brennan, struggling with doubt but still showing up. The handful of families who brought their children for catechism. How do I tell them? What do I say? Tell them what Jesus told his followers. Love one another. Forgive your enemies. Die to self. Be born again. These aren't just nice moral teachings, Father. They are survival instructions. Consciousness transformation protocols. The people who truly live these teachings will transcend, will evolve beyond what the reapers can touch, will become eternal. And those who don't will be harvested when the reapers come. Their consciousness consumed, their existence ended, not as punishment from God, but as predation from beings who see undeveloped consciousness as food. The enormity of it crushed me. 20 years. 20 years to transform human consciousness on a global scale, to teach billions of people to truly love, truly forgive, truly transcend. It was impossible. But then so was the resurrection. So was walking on water. So was feeding 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus had done impossible things to show us what we could become. Maybe I could do one impossible thing to help save us. What's the first step? I asked. Ariel stood, his tall form towering over me. The first step is to make a choice. To decide if you are willing to sacrifice everything, your position, your reputation, your safety, to tell this truth. Because the Vatican will not take kindly to you revealing what they have hidden. Neither will many in the Church. You will be called heretic. madman, false prophet. I thought about Jesus in Gethsemane, sweating blood, begging for the cup to pass, but accepting it anyway. "I'm willing," I said. "Then tomorrow, you begin. Preach the truth, all of it, and let the consequences unfold as they will." He moved toward the door of the church, his form beginning to fade, becoming translucent. "Wait," I called. "Will I see you again?" "When you need me most," his voice echoed. "I am always watching, Father O'Connor." We all are. That is what guardians do. Then he was gone, and I was alone in my church, holding a crystal that contained proof of the most important truth in human history. Tomorrow, I would have to decide how to share it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my study, staring at the crystal Ariel had left, wrestling with what to say. How do you tell people that everything they've been taught is incomplete? That Jesus came not to die for sins, but to teach them how to become inedible to cosmic predators? Sunday morning came too quickly. My congregation was small, 43 people, mostly elderly, scattered across the pews. Mrs. Murphy, in her usual front row seat. The Brennan family, with their 3 children. Mr. Gallagher, who came more out of habit than faith. A smattering of others. I stood at the pulpit, my hands shaking, the gospel reading finished. "My dear friends," I began, "today I'm going to tell you something that will sound impossible. And I ask you to listen with open hearts and open minds." I told them. Everything. Ariel's visit, the guardians, the reapers, the real reason Jesus came, the harvest approaching in 20 years. I expected shock, denial, people walking out. What I got was silence. Complete, profound silence. Mrs. Murphy stared at me with tears running down her weathered face. Tommy Brennan leaned forward, gripping the pew in front of him. Even Mr. Gallagher, who usually dozed through my sermons, sat bolt upright. "I know how this sounds," I continued. "I know it contradicts what we've been taught. But I'm asking you to consider, does it contradict what Jesus actually said? Love one another. Forgive endlessly. Die to self. Be born again. What if those aren't just moral guidelines? What if they're literal instructions for transforming consciousness, for evolving beyond what can be harvested?" "Father," Mrs. Murphy's voice wavered, "are you saying Jesus lied to us?" "No, Mrs. Murphy. I'm saying Jesus told us the truth in the only way we could understand at the time. The church later simplified that truth even further. But the core teaching remains. Love transforms us, makes us eternal, saves us, not from hell, but from something far worse." Tommy Brennan stood. "Do you have proof, Father? Or is this just a theory?" I pulled out the crystal, held it up so everyone could see. I have proof. A recording from 2,000 years ago, showing Jesus working with beings from other worlds, teaching them, learning from them, preparing to teach us how to survive. "Can we see it?" someone called from the back. I hesitated. The vision had nearly broken me. What would it do to them? But they deserved the truth. "Yes," I said, "but be warned. What you're about to see will change everything you believe." I activated the crystal. The church filled with light, and suddenly we were all there, on that hillside in Judea, watching Jesus teach, surrounded by the invisible guardians. I heard gasps, sobs, Mrs. Murphy clutched her rosary so hard her knuckles turned white. We watched Jesus preach the Sermon on the Mount, knowing now that every word was a survival instruction, a consciousness upgrade, a transformation protocol. We watched him in Gethsemane, afraid but willing, accepting the cup he'd been given. We watched him die on the cross, and then we watched something the Gospels never recorded. In the 3 days silence between death and resurrection, we saw his consciousness separate from his body, saw it elevate, transform, become something beyond physical, saw the reapers, massive, dark things that existed between dimensions, try to grasp his consciousness and fail, because he had transcended, become unreachable. Then we saw him return to his body, transformed, physical again, but different, capable of appearing and disappearing, of existing between states, proof that consciousness could survive, could evolve, could become eternal. The vision ended. My congregation sat in stunned silence. Then Tommy Brennan spoke, his voice shaking. So heaven isn't a place we go when we die? Heaven is a state we achieve through transformation, I said. A level of consciousness that exists beyond the physical, beyond what the reapers can touch. Jesus showed us the destination. The teachings show us the path. And hell, Mr. Gallagher asked, is being consumed by the reapers, having your consciousness extinguished, not as punishment, but as predation. Then what do we do? Mrs. Murphy asked. How do we prepare? We do exactly what Jesus taught. We love, we forgive, we sacrifice, we transform, not as empty rituals, but as genuine practices that fundamentally change who we are at the level of consciousness itself. Father, a woman in the back said, the church will never accept this. I know, and I will likely be excommunicated for teaching it. But I took vows to serve truth, not institution. And this is the truth. Then we believe you, Mrs. Murphy said firmly, and we'll help you spread it. One by one, my tiny congregation stood, committed, ready. We had 20 years to transform humanity's consciousness. We'd just recruited our first 43. It took exactly 5 days for the Vatican to respond. I'd posted the Crystals recording online. Tommy Brennan had helped me create a simple website and upload the footage. The real reason Jesus came to Earth had been viewed 3 million times in the first 72 hours. The responses were predictable. Half called me a heretic. A quarter said I was obviously suffering from dementia or mental illness. But the other quarter, they said the message resonated, made sense, felt true. Churches were splitting over it. Theologians were debating it. Scientists were analyzing the footage and finding no evidence of digital manipulation. And then the letter arrived. Official Vatican stationery, sealed with the seal of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. I was summoned to Rome, immediately, to answer for grave errors in doctrine and potential heresy. I went. Of course I went. I'd spent 40 years in the church. I owed them the chance to hear me out. The meeting was held in a conference room deep within the Vatican. Present were 3 cardinals, including Cardinal Ravelli, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, a man I'd met once, years ago, who'd struck me as intelligent but cold. Father O'Connor, Ravelli began without preamble, you have caused considerable damage with your recent revelations. I've told the truth, Your Eminence. You've told a version of events that contradicts 2,000 years of church teaching. I've told the version that Jesus actually lived, that the guardians witnessed, that you, at the highest levels, already know is true. The room went silent. The three cardinals exchanged glances. "Careful, Father," Ravelli said quietly. "You are making accusations you cannot prove. I have proof. The crystal recording. 2,000 years of documentation from beings who were actually there. Proof that could easily be fabricated. Proof that requires us to believe in aliens and cosmic predators and proof that you have seen yourself," I interrupted, "in the secret archives, in documents locked away from the faithful for centuries. You know about the Reapers. You know about the Guardians. You know what Jesus was really doing. And you've chosen to hide it." Ravelli's expression didn't change, but I saw one of the other cardinals, an elderly man I didn't recognize, flinch slightly. "The Church," Ravelli said carefully, "has a responsibility to maintain social order, to prevent panic, to guide the faithful toward salvation without overwhelming them with truths they cannot handle. The Reapers are coming in less than 20 years. Don't the faithful have a right to know? To prepare? They are preparing. Through the sacraments, through prayer, through living according to church teaching. The mechanism of salvation doesn't matter, only the result. It does matter. People need to understand what they're actually doing when they love and forgive. They need to know it's not just being nice, it's literally transforming their consciousness to survive predation. And if we tell them that, Ravelli said, his voice hard now, do you truly believe it will make them more loving, more forgiving? Or will it make them terrified, desperate? Will it cause the breakdown of social order, mass panic, the collapse of civilization? I hadn't thought about that. Hadn't considered that maybe the Vatican's secret-keeping had a point. People deserve truth, I said, but my voice was less certain now. People deserve truth they can handle, Ravelli corrected. And they deserve to be guided toward salvation without being traumatized by cosmic horror they cannot fight or control. That is the Church's wisdom, Father. We give them what they need, not what would destroy them. So you'll just let them be harvested? Anyone who doesn't happen to randomly achieve consciousness transformation through blind faith. We teach them the path. We cannot force them to walk it. That has always been true. The elderly cardinal finally spoke. Father O'Connor, I am Cardinal Benedetti. I have served the Church for 60 years, and I have been privy to the secret archives for 30 of those. What you say is true. We do know about the Guardians, about the Reapers, about the real nature of Christ's mission. Then why? Because we also know that in 15 previous harvests on other worlds, the species that were told about the Reapers directly all collapsed into panic and chaos. They destroyed themselves before the Reapers even arrived. But the species that were given the truth gradually, through spiritual teaching disguised as religion, had a chance. Some of them succeeded. Some transformed enough of their population to survive. You're running an experiment, I said slowly. You're testing whether humanity can transform without knowing what they're transforming for. We are trying to save as many souls as possible, Benedetti said. And history suggests that works better when people aren't paralyzed by existential terror. But 20 years is time enough for those who were already on the path, Ravelli interrupted, for those who already practice genuine love and forgiveness. For those who have been transforming their consciousness through sincere faith, they will survive. The others. He shrugged. The others likely would not have survived even with more time. Consciousness evolution cannot be rushed. You know this, Father. I did know it. 40 years of trying to get people to genuinely love and forgive had taught me that. So what happens to me? I asked. You have two choices, Ravelli said. Recant. Admit you were deceived or mistaken. Return to your parish and never speak of this again. We will quietly suppress the footage and let it fade from public consciousness. And the second choice? Excommunication, laicization. You lose your priesthood, your pension, everything, and we publicly denounce you as a fraud. Your message loses all credibility when it's known you've been removed from the church. It was a clever trap. Silence me or discredit me. But then I thought about Ariel, about Jesus in Gethsemane, about choosing the hard path because it was true. I won't recant, I said. Then you are no longer a priest, Ravelli said flatly. The excommunication was swift and public. Within a week, I was officially laicized, no longer Father O'Connor, just Michael, stripped of my priesthood, my collar, my authority. The church's denunciation was brutal but calculated. They didn't call me a liar. They called me a victim of delusion, possibly dementia, and suggested I seek psychiatric help. They expressed sorrow at my condition and prayed for my recovery. It was masterful. Instead of making me a martyr, they made me pitiable. Half my congregation abandoned me. Mrs. Murphy stayed, along with Tommy Brennan and about 20 others. But the rest believed the Vatican. Of course they did. The Vatican was the church. I was just one confused old man. I lost my rectory, my income, everything. Tommy's family took me in, gave me a room in their small house. I was 65 years old, defrocked, living on charity. But I still had the crystal, and I still had the truth. I started speaking wherever people would listen. Community centers, university campuses, YouTube videos recorded on Tommy's phone, small gatherings in living rooms. Some audiences were hostile, called me names, threw things. But others listened. Young people especially. They'd grown up with existential threats, climate change, nuclear war, pandemic. The idea that cosmic predators were coming didn't seem that much more absurd than the world they already lived in. So how do we prepare? A college student asked me once. If the reapers are really coming, what do we actually do? You practice the teachings of Christ, I said, not as religious obligations, but as consciousness exercises. When you forgive someone who hurt you, you're literally rewiring your brain away from ego and toward transcendence. When you love someone who hates you, you're expanding your consciousness beyond tribal boundaries. When you die to self, sacrifice your own desires for others, you're learning to exist partially outside your physical body. All of these practices transform you at a fundamental level. But what if we don't have enough time? Another asked. What if 20 years isn't enough to transform? Then you won't transform, I said bluntly. The reapers don't care about your intentions. They care about your actual state of consciousness. If you're still driven by fear, hate, ego, you're harvestable. If you've genuinely transcended those things, you're not. It's that simple and that brutal. So most people will be harvested? Yes, probably. Just like most seeds don't germinate. Most caterpillars don't become butterflies. Evolution is brutal. Consciousness evolution is no different. That's a terrible message, someone said angrily. You're saying most of humanity is doomed? I'm saying most of humanity has a choice. And most will choose comfort over transformation, security over growth, easy answers over hard truth. That's always been how it works. Jesus said the path is narrow and few find it. He wasn't being poetic. He was being literal. The movement grew slowly. 10,000 followers, then 100,000, then 1,000,000. We called ourselves the Transcendents, people committed to genuine consciousness transformation, not through belief, but through practice. We meditated, practiced forgiveness exercises, worked on dissolving ego, learned to love without condition or expectation. It was hard, so much harder than just going to church on Sunday and believing the right doctrines. People quit constantly. This is too much work, they'd say. Can't I just accept Jesus as my Savior and be done? That's what the church tells you, I'd respond. And it's true in a sense. Accepting Jesus means accepting his teachings and living them. But you can't shortcut consciousness transformation. You can't believe your way to transcendence. You have to practice your way there. 5 years after my excommunication, something happened that changed everything. Ariel returned. He appeared in Tommy Brennan's living room where I was staying. One moment the room was empty. The next he was there, his tall form glowing faintly in the darkness. "Michael," he said. My name, not my title. Because I was no longer father to anyone. "Ariel." I sat up from the couch where I'd been sleeping. "Has something changed?" His expression was grave. "The timeline has accelerated. The Reapers are not 20 years away anymore. They are 10. My heart sank. 10 years. But that's not enough time. We've only reached a few million people, and most of them are still early in their transformation. I know, but the Reapers follow their own schedule, not ours. Something has drawn them to this sector of space earlier than expected. They will arrive within a decade. Then humanity is doomed. 10 years isn't enough to transform billions of people. No, Ariel agreed. It is not. Which is why I am here to give you another option. What option? There are places, sanctuary worlds, planets protected by species like mine who have evolved beyond the Reaper's reach. We can evacuate a limited number of humans before the harvest, perhaps a few million. Those who have already begun the transformation process, those who show the most potential. You're offering to save some and abandon the rest? We are offering to preserve the species, to give humanity a second chance on another world. It is more than most harvested species receive. I stood, pacing the small room. And the billions left behind will be harvested, their consciousness consumed. It is tragic, but inevitable. The Reapers cannot be fought, Michael. They exist partially outside physical reality. They cannot be killed or stopped. They can only be transcended. And most of humanity will not transcend in time. Jesus didn't give up on people. He died for all of them, not just the ones who were ready. Jesus died to show the path, but he could not force people to walk it. Neither can you. Neither can we. There has to be another way. Ariel was silent for a long moment. Then, there is one possibility, extremely dangerous, never attempted on a planetary scale, and with perhaps a 10% chance of success. Tell me. A consciousness cascade. If enough people, perhaps 1% of your population, roughly 70 million, achieve genuine transformation, their elevated consciousness could create a field effect. A resonance. It would not save everyone, but it might pull another 30 to 40% along with them. Elevate them just enough to become unreachable by the reapers. So instead of saving a few million, we could save billions. If it works, if we can reach the tipping point of 70 million genuinely transformed individuals, if the cascade effect manifests as the theory predicts. There are many ifs, Michael. But there's a chance? Yes, a small one. Then that's what we do. We forget about evacuation. We focus everything on reaching critical mass for the cascade. You would risk the certain salvation of millions on the uncertain salvation of billions. I thought about Jesus, about his refusal to save only the righteous, his insistence on going after the lost sheep, the prodigal son, the tax collectors and sinners. Yes, I said, that's exactly what I'd do. Because that's what he would do. Ariel studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. Then we have 10 years to transform 70 million human beings. We will help as much as we are permitted. But the work must be primarily yours. What kind of help can you provide? We can give you technology, ways to teach consciousness transformation more efficiently, ways to identify people who are ready, ways to create environments where transformation happens faster. And the Vatican? Will they try to stop us? They already are. They see you as a threat to their authority, but they also fear the reapers. It creates an interesting tension. Some in the church secretly hope you succeed, even as they publicly condemn you. Cardinal Benedetti? Among others. He cannot help you openly, but he will not hinder you either. That is something. Over the next weeks, Ariel taught me techniques the Guardians had learned from hundreds of harvested worlds. Consciousness exercises that accelerated transformation, meditation methods that dissolved ego faster, ways of teaching love and forgiveness that actually rewired neural pathways. We incorporated them into the transcendent movement, and the growth accelerated. 1 million became 5 million, 5 became 20, 20 became 50. People were waking up, transforming, becoming something more than they had been. But we still needed 70 million, and we had less than 10 years to get there. Year 7 after Ariel's warning. 3 years left until the Reapers arrived. We had 62 million transcendents, people who had genuinely transformed their consciousness through rigorous practice. Not people who just believed or attended meetings, but people who had done the work, who had forgiven the unforgivable, loved the unlovable, dissolved their egos enough to exist partially outside physical reality. We needed 8 million more, 8 million to reach the tipping point, to trigger the cascade that might save billions. And we were running out of time. The world knew about the Reapers now. 3 years earlier, Ariel's people had provided enough evidence that even mainstream science couldn't deny it. Telescopes detected the massive fleet approaching from beyond the solar system, moving at impossible speeds, arriving in exactly 3 years. Governments had tried to prepare, built weapons, developed technologies. All useless. The Reapers existed partially in other dimensions. You couldn't shoot what barely existed in your reality. The only defense was transcendence, and most people still didn't believe it would work. You want me to meditate and forgive people, and that's supposed to save me from cosmic predators? Was a common refrain. That's insane. It is insane, I'd respond, but it's also true. Consciousness that has transcended physical attachment exists on a frequency the reapers cannot touch. It's not about being good. It's about being transformed. Some listened. Most didn't. The transcendent movement was now global. Millions practicing the techniques. Millions more halfway there. But we needed 8 million more at full transformation. Then something unexpected happened. The Vatican changed course. Pope Francis III, elected after the previous pope died of a heart attack when the reapers were confirmed, issued a stunning encyclical. Brothers and sisters in Christ, it began, we have been given a great trial and a great opportunity. The beings approaching our world are real. The danger is real. And the path to salvation that Christ taught us has proven to be not metaphor, but literal instruction. He went on to endorse the transcendent practices, to call on all Catholics, all Christians, all people of faith to engage in rigorous consciousness transformation. The Church has preserved the teachings of Christ for 2,000 years. Now we understand their true purpose. They were always meant to save us, not from abstract sin, but from very real consumption. Let us use the time we have left to become what Christ showed us we could be. It was a complete reversal, and it changed everything. Suddenly, churches were teaching meditation. Monasteries were opening their doors to train people in ego dissolution. Priests were leading forgiveness exercises instead of just preaching about forgiveness. The growth exploded. 62 million became 65. Then 68. Then 70. We hit 70 million with 2 years to spare. And according to Ariel, something began to happen. The field is forming, he told me, his instruments detecting what human technology could not. 70 million transformed consciousnesses are creating a resonance, an attractor field. Other people are being pulled toward transformation without fully understanding why. The cascade? Beginning. It will build over the next 2 years. By the time the reapers arrive, we estimate 40% of humanity will have been pulled across the threshold. Perhaps 3 billion people. And the other 60%? His expression was sorrowful. Will be harvested. It is a tragedy, but it is better than 99%, which was the alternative. I thought about the 5 billion who would still die, who would have their consciousness consumed, who would cease to exist. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. We have 2 years, I said. Let's see if we can push that percentage higher. The final year before the reapers arrived was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. Half the world was in a state of constant spiritual practice. Meditation centers in every city. Forgiveness circles on every block. The entire planet engaged in the most intensive consciousness transformation in history. The other half was in denial, panic, or despair. Some built bunkers. Some rioted. Some just gave up. Governments were barely functioning. The economy had collapsed. But somehow, people were feeding each other, helping each other, coming together in ways they never had before. The proximity of death, real, certain, cosmic death, was transforming humanity faster than anything ever had. We hit 80 million fully transformed transcendents, then 90, then 100. The cascade was exceeding predictions. Ariel estimated that 55% of humanity might survive, over 4 billion people. I was 85 years old now, 20 years since Ariel first appeared in my confessional. I was old, tired, my body failing. But my consciousness had never been more alive. I could feel it. The transformation. I existed less and less in my physical body, and more in something else. Something vast, connected, eternal. I understood what Jesus had meant when he said, "I and the Father are one." It wasn't metaphor. At a certain level of consciousness, individual identity dissolved into universal consciousness. You didn't stop being you. You just became aware that you had always been part of something infinitely larger. 1 week before the Reapers arrived, Ariel came to me one last time. "It is done," he said. "The cascade has reached maximum effect. 58% of humanity has crossed the threshold. They will survive the harvest. And the other 42%? 3,300,000,000 souls will be consumed." I wept. Even knowing we'd saved 4 billion, I wept for the 3 billion we couldn't save. "They had the same opportunity," Ariel said gently, "the same teachings, the same time. They chose not to transform. They were scared, confused, human. Yes, and that is both humanity's weakness and its tragedy. Fear is so powerful in your species. It prevents transformation even when transformation is the only path to survival." "Will you stay?" I asked. "When the Reapers come?" "Yes, to witness, to record, to honor those who transcend and mourn those who do not." The last week I spent in prayer. Not prayer in the way I'd done for 40 years as a priest, petitioning God for favors, but prayer as communion, as connection, as existing in the space between physical and eternal. I could feel the others, the 58% who had transformed. 4 billion consciousnesses, all resonating at a frequency beyond physical, all connected in a vast web of love and awareness. It was what Christ had prayed for. "That they may all be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you." We were becoming one, not losing our individuality, but transcending it, becoming part of something vast and eternal and beautiful. And on the day the Reapers arrived, I understood something that shook me to my core. This was heaven, not a place you went when you died, but a state of consciousness you achieved while living. A frequency of existence beyond physical reality. The people who had transformed hadn't just saved themselves from the Reapers. They had literally become the kingdom of heaven Christ had promised. They appeared in the sky at dawn. Massive, incomprehensible. Things that hurt to look at because they existed partially outside the dimensions our eyes could process. The Reapers. Humanity watched in terror and awe as the vast ships, if they could be called ships, descended into Earth's atmosphere. But something was different this time. Usually, according to Ariel, the Reapers arrived to a planet of screaming, terrified beings. Easy prey. Consciousness still trapped in physical bodies, easy to extract and consume. This time, they arrived to a planet where 58% of the population had already partially transcended. I stood outside Tommy Brennan's house, now an old man of 85 watching the sky. Tommy stood beside me, his hair gray now, his children grown with children of their own. "Are you afraid?" Tommy asked. "No," I said truthfully. "I can feel my consciousness existing beyond my body now. Even if they destroy this physical form, I will continue. That's what transcendence means." I feel it too, Tommy said. It's like I'm in my body, but I'm also everywhere else at the same time. That was exactly it. The transformed consciousness existed in multiple states simultaneously, physical and non-physical, individual and universal, mortal and eternal. The reapers began their harvest. I could see it somehow. With senses that existed beyond physical sight, they were pulling consciousness from physical bodies, extracting the life force of those who remained trapped in material existence. 3 billion people died in a matter of hours. Not violently, not painfully. They simply stopped. Their consciousness extracted, consumed, used to fuel the incomprehensible mechanisms of the Reaper's existence. It was the most horrific thing I had ever witnessed. But the 4 billion who had transcended, the Reapers couldn't touch them. I watched as the vast entities tried to extract transformed consciousness and failed. It was like trying to grasp water. The consciousness existed on a frequency they couldn't reach. After 12 hours, the Reapers stopped. They had taken what they could take. The rest was beyond their reach. And then something extraordinary happened. One of the Reapers communicated. Not in words, but in pure concept, transmitted directly to all transformed consciousnesses on Earth. Unprecedented. This world has succeeded. 58% transcendence. Highest survival rate in recorded harvest history. This species will be marked, protected. No further harvests. Congratulations, humanity. You have graduated. Then they left. Simply vanished from Earth's sky as if they had never been. The silence that followed was profound. 4 billion transformed humans stood in stunned realization of what had just happened. We had survived. More than survived. We had transformed enough that we would never be harvested again. Earth was now a protected world. Humanity had passed the test, but 3 billion had died. I fell to my knees and wept. For the lost, for the saved, for the sheer improbability of what we had just accomplished. Ariel appeared beside me. You did it, Michael. Against all probability, against all historical precedent, humanity has transcended. But the cost is always terrible. On other worlds, 99% die. Here, only 42%. You saved billions who would have been lost. Be proud of that. I can't be proud when 3 billion died. Then honor them by building the world they died to make possible. A world of transformed consciousness. A world that will never face harvest again. I looked up at the sky, now empty of reapers, and made a silent vow. We would build that world. We would make sure their deaths meant something. We would create the heaven on earth that Christ had always promised. 5 years after the harvest, I stood in what used to be St. Peter's Square in Rome, now transformed into something both familiar and radically new. The Vatican still stood. The Church still existed, but it had been completely reimagined. Pope Francis III had dissolved the rigid hierarchies. We exist to serve consciousness transformation, he declared, not to maintain power structures. Christ never wanted us to build empires. He wanted us to build awakened souls. The Catholic Church, along with every other major religion, had restructured around a single purpose: teaching genuine consciousness transformation. Meditation, forgiveness, ego dissolution, love without condition. The old debates about doctrine, about who was right and wrong, about which interpretation was correct, all of it had been swept away by the simple reality of the harvest. Only transformation mattered. Only transcendence saved. Everything else was commentary. I was 90 years old now. My body was failing rapidly, but my consciousness had never been more alive, more awake, more present. "Teacher Michael," a young woman approached me. She was perhaps 25, born just before the harvest, part of the first generation growing up in the transformed world. "Is it true you were a priest?" "Before?" "Yes," I said. "Before the Vatican excommunicated me for telling the truth. And now they've made you a saint." I laughed. It was true. Pope Francis III had not only reinstated me, but canonized me. Saint Michael the Transcendent, they called me. Patron saint of consciousness transformation. The irony was delicious. "What was it like?" the young woman asked. "Before the harvest?" When people didn't understand. "Dark," I said honestly. Most people lived in fear. Chased after possessions, status, pleasure, anything to distract from the awareness that they would die. Religion was often about avoiding hell, not about genuine transformation, and we nearly lost everything because of it. "But you saved us." "No. Jesus saved you by showing the path. Ariel saved you by revealing the urgency. I just reminded people of what they already knew deep down. That love transforms, that consciousness can transcend, that we're capable of so much more than we usually settle for." "What happens when you die?" she asked. "You're very old now. Will you be afraid?" "No," I said, and I meant it. Death is just transition now. My consciousness will release from this physical form, but it will continue. I'll still exist, just in a different state. That's what transcendence gives us. Not immortality of the body, but immortality of consciousness. She nodded, understanding in a way previous generations never could. Everyone who survived the harvest understood death differently now. "Will you teach me more?" she asked. "Before you die?" "I want to learn from someone who lived through the transformation." "I'll teach you what I can," I said. "But the real teacher is your own practice. Your own willingness to dissolve ego, to love without condition, to exist beyond the physical." As the sun set over Rome, I thought about the journey. From rural Irish priest to excommunicated heretic to canonized saint. From teaching salvation from sin to teaching salvation from consumption. And I thought about Ariel, who I knew was still watching, still protecting, still guiding humanity as we learned to navigate our new existence as a transcended species. "Thank you," I whispered to the sky, "for giving us a chance. For believing we could do it." I felt a warmth in my consciousness that I recognized as his presence. "You did it yourselves, Michael. We only reminded you of what you already were." That night, I died peacefully in my sleep. But I didn't stop existing. My consciousness simply transitioned to a state beyond physical. I could still observe Earth, could still feel the presence of the 4 billion transformed humans who had survived, could still sense the love that connected us all. And I understood, finally and completely, what Jesus had been teaching all along. Heaven wasn't a place you went when you died. Heaven was what you became when you transformed. And hell wasn't eternal punishment from an angry God. Hell was simply remaining unconscious, trapped in ego and fear, until something consumed you. We had been given the instructions for transcendence 2,000 years ago. It had taken the imminent threat of cosmic predators to finally motivate us to follow them. But we had followed them, and we had survived. And now, humanity was finally ready to take its place among the evolved species of the universe, not as children needing protection, but as transformed beings who had earned their place in the cosmos. The real reason Jesus came to Earth, not to die for our sins, but to show us how to live forever. And we had finally learned the lesson.